Good morning, afternoon, and evening, everybody, and welcome to today's Adjust webinar in partnership with ironSource and Nexon Mobile, leveling up best practices for your mobile gaming app launch. My name is Kevin, and I'm part of the marketing team here at Adjust. I'd like to start off by introducing our three presenters of the day. So first off, we're happy to welcome Warren Woodward. Warren is the Director of User Acquisition at Nexon. Thank you so much for being here today.
What's up, Kevin? Everybody, thanks for having me.
Hey, Warren. Alongside Warren, we're also welcoming Yevgeny Paris. Yevgeny is the VP of Growth Developer Solutions at ironSource. Yevgeny, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Awesome. And alongside Warren and Yevgeny, we're welcoming Matthew Gall. Matthew is a technical key account manager here at Adjust. Once again, thank you all for being here. So a few housekeeping rules before we get started. The webinar is scheduled to last about 30 to 40 minutes. For those of you new to GoToWebinar, you should see a panel on either side of your screen. You can use this panel to ask any question you might have throughout the presentation, and our speakers will address them at the end of the session. Finally, the recording of the presentation and the slides will be shared with all of you via email after the webinar. So on the agenda today, we'll start off by briefly introducing the three companies before diving right into the topic. Pretty straightforward. We decided to break this down today to look at what the key elements are in the context of a mobile gaming app launch, specifically looking at this by launch phase. So we'll first be looking into what happens and what you should look at during pre-launch or soft launch. We'll then focus on what is key and critical during the actual launch phase. And then we'll finish by analyzing and providing insights on what you should actually pay attention to and act on once your app has launched. We'll allow some time for questions at the end to give you guys the opportunity to get a personalized answer. So please go ahead, send us your questions once again throughout the presentation, not a problem. Without further ado, I'll hand this over to our presenters, starting with Matthew, who's going to quickly introduce who Adjust is. Matthew, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Kevin. Nice to meet you all. So just a little bit about Adjust. We've been around since 2012, and the main concept was that we were built to simplify the mobile ecosystem, centralize all of your data. With so many different platforms and ways to measure engagement, it can be a monumental task to do this on your own. So Adjust is trying to take the guesswork out, be as transparent as possible, and give marketers the tools that they need to measure, attribute, and analyze mobile engagements. So to date, Adjust has been ranked the #1 mobile attribution SDK used in the top iOS apps. We've been integrated over 22,000 times, pretty cool, have over 150 employees, over 14 offices around the world. As well, we track over 100 billion data points this month. And with all that data, we've also been able to be integrated with over 1,000 partners, which is why we can make this measurement and attribution so seamless. So from A to Z, Adjust is there with the measurement.
Yevgeny, you might be muted.
Hi, guys. So ironSource is a monetization platform for app developers that allows app developers and publishers to monetize their apps through ads, through several ad products and monetization solutions around mediation and ad serving. And on the flip side is a leading channel for distribution and user acquisition and re-engagement. You can see the metrics on the screen. Basically, in terms of scale, the company itself is very heavy on R&D, overall 720 employees, working with 15,000 app developers out there for distribution and monetization. In terms of downloads per minute, delivering 4,200 downloads and analyzing 150 billion data points monthly, where all the purpose of that is really to allow app developers and marketers to acquire the right users and monetize them later on.
Great, and this is Warren here with Nexon. So Nexon is a global gaming company. We have 5 international offices. Fun fact is that I didn't know until I started working with Nexon is we're generally credited as having the first known model of what evolved into free-to-play gaming. It can be a good thing or bad thing depending on who you are. So for our office here in the Bay Area, we focus on mobile and bringing mobile games to the West. So we had actually last month over 6 million mobile apps installed, and in 2016 the company generated over 1.6 billion in gaming revenue. 100 million of that was actually revenue from Dominations, which is our oldest mobile title that we run out of our office. Nexon has around 5,000 plus employees internationally, and there's about 80 of us here in our Bay Area office.
Awesome. So thanks, guys, for these intro, and let's dive right into the first launch, soft launch.
Thanks, Kevin. So as Kevin said, we're going to set up today. The topic for today came up. We were discussing ideas, and initially I was like, I don't have time to do a webinar. We've been too busy launching games, and we thought, well, why don't we just talk about launching games? It can be a pretty consuming process, so we're going to break it down into the 3 main phases, and I'm going to talk about the UA team's role in each of those phases because it can be quite different. So there's an image there for Titanfall Assault, which is a game that we brought through the soft launch process and into a global launch earlier this year. And our team has actually soft launched about a dozen games in 2017, so we're getting quite good at it along the way. Thought we'd share some best practices. So when we're in the soft launch phase, the goal for the UA team, we really see ourselves as a service at that point to the developer and to our product team. We want to provide quick and clean data for our company so we can make the right business decisions. So besides that, we also want to be using the soft launch period as a chance for us to build some of the models that we have to use to operate UA. So this is things like figuring out our bid strategy, mapping out the LTV curve of the game. Another thing we want to make sure we do in soft launch is get our UA tool set in order. So this includes like obviously making sure your attribution is working. We use Adjust here at Nexon. They've been a good partner for us, very reliable. And you want to also vet any other tools that are going to be involved with the game. And then the last point, the thing we're really trying to figure out in soft launch is, does this game have what it takes? Most games should probably not be launched. Most should probably die in soft launch, and it's important to come to terms with that because launching the wrong game can quickly put your company out of business, especially for a smaller company. So to talk a little bit about UA creative strategy in each of these phases. In soft launch, we use the 3+3 rule. So this basically means that we look for a set of 3 video ads and 3 corresponding static ad concepts. Those static ad concepts can also double as the end card for the video slate. And you want to make sure that you give your creative team like a thorough list of all of the sizes and outputs that you need for each of the traffic sources you use during soft launch, so you make sure that you have everything covered. And you want to give your creative team at least 6 weeks for best results. And if you don't have an internal creative team, one thing that I don't see enough people taking advantage of, or even if you do have an internal creative team and want to supplement it, most of the ad networks that you do a fair amount of business with have internal resources for creative, and they are happy to help you out. It's a symbiotic relationship because it gives us more ads that we can use for our launches, and it gives the ad network a means that you can start buying traffic through them for a new title. So moving on to the next slide. Some other general best practices for soft launch. As I said, we soft launch a ton of games here, so we try to really standardize the phases so we can measure apples to apples with each game. So typically the first soft launch phase, you just want to be looking at your server stability. Does the game start crashing like crazy when you get players in? Typically you only need 1,000 or so players for this just kind of sanity check, and you can do UA to get these players in really affordable regions. We like to use Southeast Asia. Definitely don't expose it to any key markets at this phase. When you move on to soft launch phase 2, you usually want to be looking at early game retention, your day 1, day 7, maybe up to day 30. And basically you're seeing is the game engaging for players? Are they sticking around? Usually in this phase, because we care mostly about the Western market out of our office, we'll open up to the Nordic countries. This is because they're countries that have similar behavior and monetization to US, but there's a much less market exposure. So if the game still does have major issues, we're not exposing to our major markets yet. And then moving on to phase 3, this is where you really make the final judgment on the game. You want to be measuring monetization. You usually need at least 10,000 players in the game to have enough payers to get a clean read on this. And this is typically when you want to open up to the countries that are generally considered the most similar to the US, with Canada and or Australia. Okay, so when we're in the soft launch phase, we are really prioritizing speed and clean data over ROI. This is sometimes counterintuitive because usually any other time our team and our company is working to maximize ROI. We'll touch on this a little bit. So you really want to be only using, I recommend 3 to 5 of your proven traffic sources that you know a lot about what their advertising inventory is, that you have a lot of experience with the quality level, and you know that there's not going to be a lot of low quality sources within the network or potential fraud, because again, we're trying to get a clean read on typical player behavior. Something to keep in mind during this phase is that you're going to see higher CPIs than you normally would in these given regions. This is for 2 reasons. The first is that we just have less to work with. We're going to have less creative here. And the less creative you have and the weaker that creative might be, the more you have to compensate by overbidding to make up for weaker creative performance. The other factor here is time is of the essence. A lot of times we only have a few days or maybe a week or 2 to fulfill the phases listed above. So when you can't compromise on time, a way that you can make sure that you're hitting your ask on time is by making sure you're at the top of your network's waterfall or near the top, so you can quickly get the installs you need. To speak a little bit about targeting during this phase, you don't want to do a lot of targeting, which is often counterintuitive as well, because normally we want to get just the best, highest monetizing users, but here we wanted to simulate again what the average player is going to be behaving like. So very light targeting, maybe just targeting gamers, or if a network you use is mostly gaming apps, you can do just run of the whole network. The last point, as far as considerations, is just don't launch bad games. Be very honest about the improvements that can be made between soft launch and worldwide. And if you don't think that it's going to turn into a game that has LTVs that support competitive UA, doesn't mean you have to outright cancel the game, but you should not be planning a serious UA spend behind it. You're going to lose a lot of money and feel the pain from it. All right.
Thanks, Warren. When it comes to the network function and really the role of the network in soft launch, it's really important from prior to the soft launch to really post-launch to really be aligned with the game studio on understanding the strategy and the KPIs for each phase, and also sharing best practices in terms of how to define those KPIs, which countries, markets to go after in each phase, and kind of learn from other marketers' mistakes. When it comes to the timeline of the creative development, this is something that is pretty critical, and you want to be ready in advance in order to really streamline the production process. If you can share an early build of the game with the network, this is amazing, and will really allow the network to produce the best possible creatives that really portray what the gameplay looks like, and obviously leaving time for several iterations after you provide the network feedback. So you're really ready with a couple versions of different creatives that you feel comfortable about, that really you think that will really drive the right users in soft launch, because you really want them engaged. You really want them to understand the product, and it's not only about downloading the game, but really engaging with it, so you can really test and reach the right insights throughout the soft launch process. When it comes to the network and the soft launch game, you want to be able to predict what is the best fit as a marketer based on historical data that the network has, or if you have any assumption that you want to utilize, so it will really allow the campaign to be delivered and really to acquire the right users. And when it comes to networking, the network needs to share the risk with the game studio when it comes to securing the best possible supply throughout the soft launch to really achieve those goals in those smaller markets, so you can really get the right insights and move on to the next phase.
All right, so Thanks, guys. So as Warren and Evgeny were talking about, I mean, they're going to be validating, they're setting their hypotheses, they're getting everything ready for creative development, for getting out there. So just to reiterate the role of adjust, we want to know where, when, and how people are coming into your app, right? So basically, we're going to be there to help give you the tools you need to verify if your hypothesis is correct and whatnot. Adjust is there from the engagement through the install and into the user lifetime, right? So we aim to help with that analysis. Now is the time to be considering the setup or what adjust is meant to do for you. Of course, we're going to go more into this later in regards to the data that we're going to pass you regarding optimization, fraud, retargeting, and more, right? So probably the first thing to know is that you're going to integrate our SDK into the app. Number one is that we're going to be tracking installs, right? So it's good to understand before we go out there the logic that adjust holds everyone to, right? Understanding the rules will guide how your partners will optimize and will also set your own expectations, right? And this, in effect, will control your spend. So it's pretty straightforward. We go on a last click methodology. So, for example, if we see clicks for a particular install from Facebook, Google, and ironSource, and ironSource was the last engagement or click before the install, ironSource is given the credit for a said install. And for everything that this person does in the app from then on, will be credited to ironSource. Now, we also do impression tracking, right? This is very impactful for branding or display efforts or measuring that. Actually, we do see a lift in attributions regarding impressions because a lot of people do see some impactful advertisements, but then they don't actually install right then and there. Right? And as well, adjust also does measure re-engagements or reattributions, a lot less relevant considering this is a brand new game. But it's just something to know. So now, moving forward, we also have, so that last slide is more about the inflow of users, that knowing that we can work with partners like Evgeny and ironSource and Facebook and Google, Snapchat, etc. And also like, you know, what are the capabilities of our measurements? Part of going off of what the KPIs that actually Warren was discussing, we want to, adjust is also able to track the users in your app. So we offer an ability to track events and revenue. So a good practice is to actually implement events that you want your partners to be measured on, or concurrently how you want to assess yourself as a UA person, right? And with this, adjust can analyze the lifetime value of a user and also help assess the strength and engagement of your users from different campaigns. Anything can be tracked as long as it's in your app build, any button, any event. So popular examples are going to be registration events, which sometimes for clients are the bare minimum for assigning credit, depending on the UA manager's perspective. Or something that's more applicable in Warren's case, or for gaming clients, setting checkpoints for engagement like a level 3, signifying minimal engagement, and a user hitting level 50 signifying a heavy user, right? And then, of course, the source that gives you a lot of level 50 users is probably the one you want to work with, right? And as well, for everything that we measure in the app, we also pass you that raw data. So adjust is processing a lot of raw data, and we want to pass it to you. A lot of people leverage this ability for backup or for own analysis by feeding this into internal BI systems. Adjust has a strong stance on privacy. This data is yours. We want to give it back to you, right? And then the next level tip is we can do some fun configurations like pairing your internal ID with a UDID. That's something we can discuss later on. So now that we've worried about like the inflow and actually what we're going to be tracking users in the app, we also are integrated with a lot of different partners, as I said before. It's really good to discuss with them that you're working with Adjust and what to expect from the data. So it's good to discuss the KPIs that you want to hold each other to, because this will be good for setting expectations and there will be clear defined goals, right? Like, hey, I need you to get me users that are hitting level 3 minimum, for example. We have integrations with hundreds of partners. ironSource is one of them. Some people benefit from an extended integration via modules. And one of those people include Facebook, Google, and ironSource. And the last thing I'd recommend is just testing, right? It's just good practice. I know it sounds kind of simple, but yeah, you'd be surprised. It's really good to do that. It's good to know that there's parity in understanding across your UA team, marketers, developers, data scientists, and more, because Adjust can receive and analyze and send relevant data for all those roles.
Thanks, guys, for these insights on the soft launch phase. Now let's move on to the actual launch phase. Warren, back to you.
Hey guys, Warren here again. So yeah, there's a screenshot on the right, or piece of key art rather, for a game we just launched 2 weeks ago called Battlejack. This was a big launch for us, and we want to talk a little bit about the things that we look for in a launch as a game company. So the theme of the worldwide launch is you want to maximize opportunity and impact. There's a lot of things that happen or opportunities that present themselves during that first week and first month that won't happen at any other time during a game's life cycle. So you really want to make sure that you're set up to take full advantage of them. To touch on the creative plan you should have going into worldwide, the same way that we had a 3+3 rule for soft launch, we like to upgrade that to a minimum of a 10+10 rule for the number of video concepts and static concepts that we execute. You also want to increase the number of channels that you use here. I recommended only using 3 to 5 for soft launch. For worldwide, you want to grow this quite a bit. You don't want to go crazy with a bunch of untested channels, but I'd say you want to use 8 to 10 of your known channels that you've been able to drive profit for other projects. Maybe including, a couple of experiments as well, but not letting that exceed, say, 20% of the budget. Another rule of thumb that we're starting to adopt is making playables just a standard part of the launch process. Battlejack was the first game where we had a playable ready on launch day. Thank you very much to ironSource for being one of our playable partners there. So I would recommend, if you know a game's going to worldwide, definitely start talking to either your internal team if they can make those playables, or to networks like ironSource and some of the others that have in-house teams that can make them. As far as the lead time for the worldwide creative package, I recommend extending it a little bit. So you want to give your team at least 8 weeks from when you know the game's graduated to a worldwide launch. The reason we like to give a little more time here is you should be going a little more wild with your concepts. So in soft launch, I didn't mention it, but one thing that you should focus on for soft launch creatives, there should be very like bread and butter. Just show the gameplay really clearly, let people know the kind of experience that they're getting in for, because you're just trying to pre-sell them and show them what they're going to get, so you get clean data. But in worldwide, we want to get a little wild. We want to start thinking of ourselves a little more like an advertising agency, in the sense that we will try high concept pieces, maybe things with live action or more funny stuff, out there stuff. And I'd say make sure it's still at least half of your plan is things that really show off the gameplay, but also take those crazier shots. And again, use this as an opportunity to tap your ad networks for video and playable ads. A lot of times you'll find that the networks are more willing to start making this stuff for you when they know that you are going into a launch phase. And to be a little blunt, this is because they know that you're likely going to be spending more money with them. The creative services offered by many networks are free to us as a developer, but the kind of unspoken agreement is they're hoping that if they're making something for you, that you intend to spend on their network. So launch is a time where spend is concentrated. Moving on to the next slide. Some general best practices to keep in mind for worldwide. There's a lot, but I'll touch on some of the basics. So again, we want to be looking for some of those unique opportunities that the launch window provides. One of the most impactful is that you're going to see CPIs at some of their lowest of the lifetime of the title when you're in a worldwide launch. So there's two factors that play into this. The first is that the app is going to be new in most of the markets that you release to. So it'll be everyone's first time seeing the ads, and that will get the maximum impact. And the other big deal is you're going to have complementary support. You're going to have some PR efforts going on, and you're going to have hopefully some sort of support from the app and Play stores for featuring. Getting that organic featuring support is a huge boon to UA. It gives us an additional touch point, so people are seeing the ads from our team, but they're also seeing a very prominent featuring banner, and having that multiple touch points is more likely to drive the install and more likely to make our ads effective, thus driving down that CPI. Some other tactics to keep in mind, preemptive blacklist. So especially if you've launched a few games and worked with your networks for a while, you have a sense of certain pubs that you're always blacklisting on every network. You can also ask your contacts at the network, try to cut out some of this noise because you're going to have such a concentrated spend this first week, and you can lose a lot on those bad placements. Related to this, you want to be looking at your ad networks not just as a creative resource, but as an optimization resource. If you have a good rep, they are optimizing campaigns regularly, and they know their network better than just about anyone else, but the thing you have to do is make them understand your goals. Give them clear rules for success and a clear path showing basically, hey, if you can hit my goal, it might be a ROI that you expect by day 3, day 7. And basically, show the network that if you continue to hit this goal, we can keep growing this account together and increasing spend. That makes it worth their while to put in the time to help you reach that goal. So one thing to keep in mind during this first week is scheduling initial publisher optimizations and bid optimizations on all your networks. Because launches typically happen late Wednesday or Thursday, I recommend just we call it the Stop the Bleeding round every Friday after a launch, and we're just looking in all of our sources to say, hey, are we wildly overbidding in any countries? Are we hitting our caps? Are there bad publishers that are taking up a lot of the spend? And I want to touch quickly on how you identify what a bad publisher is or a bad network. So early on, like this first pass on Friday, we want to be looking really early in the funnel. We want to see if there are diversions in either your day 1 retention or early in-game events. Matt touched on how you can track custom events and adjust. This is definitely something we make use of. So we'll always track a tutorial completion. Every game's got a tutorial or first-time user experience. And if we see this certain source or network that's really under-indexing on that, we'll quickly either bid down or remove them from the launch. As you get maybe a week or so of data, you want to start moving your optimizations away from that early funnel stuff and focusing on things like payer rate and ultimately moving to yield or ROI-based optimizations. Last piece of advice for launch is just clear your calendar for the team. It's going to get crazy. Ask of yourself and your team members to be available on the weekends. You never know how those first few days are going to go. And it's going to be a high concentration of spend, so definitely all hands on deck, and then give everyone a nice break once you make it through that launch window successfully. All right, that's it for me.
Thanks, Warren. When it comes to the launch itself, here's another a great opportunity to be able to really capture the best opportunities. You want to be able to manage that risk, and when it comes to working closely with the network, you want to be able to communicate that and focus delivery on the high monetizing sources. You want to allow the network to secure the best supply through first deal positions with the publishers and really securing best possible reach when it comes to users that already that are going to be high monetizing and really scale up on those sources. And on the other end, you want to leave room when it comes to budget allocation for finding new high yield supply pockets where you might find surprises from publishers you didn't expect or new publishers that are going live within the network. When it comes to creatives, A/B testing is something critical from day 0. You want to be able to go live with several creatives, and the difference between different creatives when it comes to serving is that some ads might convert users easier, so you'll see higher metrics when it comes to click-through rates and conversion rates, but they won't necessarily be driving the right users when it comes to engagement with the app, with the metrics Warren mentioned, like early metrics like tutorial completion and later on monetization. So you want to analyze that full funnel from the impression to the monetization and make the right decisions when it comes to which creatives should be running. And this is the role of the network here. But you want to monitor that and make sure that it's happening. For us within ironSource, we're using an algorithm that is called the multi-arm bandit, where basically what it means is that the allocation of impressions are dynamically distributed based on the performance. And in the first stage, before you have enough data, you will allocate that based on the metrics from impression to conversion. but once you have a few days of data, you will see how those users are monetizing per creative, and you'll be able to make the right decision, whether it's you or the network, and really maximize the yield based on the best creative possible. In terms of ROI, return on ad spend, learning, you can use those early indicators like tutorial completion and other metrics like sessions, retention, to kind of predict and foresee what would be the return on those dimensions. With time, you're basically going to be moving from retention to a stable return on ad spend curve that you'll need to communicate to the network, and it's going to be the network's job to really optimize that and hit those goals. This is an example I can see on the right. Thanks, Kevin. Basically, it's an animated GIF of how the playable creative looks like. You can see the users basically need to engage. They can really see the features of the game. In a way, it's a tutorial of the game. And basically, what's happening here is they're kind of playing a level in the game. The metrics we've seen for this specific one were great. A very high engagement rate. The users don't really have to play, right? So 49% of them decided to engage with the ad and start playing. IPM, which is a metric that defines the ratio between installs and 1,000 impressions, are on the high end for these type of titles. And compared to the video creatives that we're running, it's 2x. And this really allows the campaign to scale faster when you're testing several creatives. And when you have the winning one, you're really able to scale faster. And Warren, if you want to chime in here, but basically it really allowed Nexon in this case to scale up faster in the first week.
Yeah, absolutely. I wouldn't be talking about this if it wasn't a success for us. But the Battlejack Playable was a huge breakout for launch week for us. As you have said, an important thing to keep in mind is like this ad is running in the same pockets of inventory as the video ad, so it's competing directly with those. So when we see that it has twice the install rate of our best video ad, that has the same net effect, that letting us cut our bid in half if we want, compared with the best video ad. So we then can either get essentially twice the volume, maybe even more than that at our standard bid, or we can cut our bid in half and move that traffic towards the playable. This let us scale up really quickly and still hitting our goals with ironSource in this case. So we had a really abnormal case. ironSource is always a good partner for us, but they ended up being our largest spending partner during our launch week, and we used about a dozen networks during that launch week, including the biggest ones in the business. And ironSource jumped to the top of the pack this time, and it was largely due to the success of this playable ad. And it's worth saying again that we didn't actually spend anything out of pocket. This is something that ironSource made for us. So we're really appreciative of how this was able to contribute to the launch.
Thanks, Warren. I think the critical piece around the success of this creative is on the collaboration front between the teams within ironSource and Nexon, and really have visibility into what are the planned launches each year. How soon can we start working in creatives? How soon can we start iterating on how things look, and really achieve those results? And like I mentioned earlier, and I want to reiterate that it's something that is really, really important and key to the success of the campaign if you start discussing this early on. On the next slide, I think the pros of using interactive ads or playable ads is pretty clear. But basically, what's interesting here is it's really aligned with this little launch strategy. You want to have users that are when they download the app, they know what they're getting, and in this case, they're really engaging with the game and kind of finishing the tutorial before they even install it. And you see the metrics, it allows you to outperform your competitors, eCPM. And by competitors, I mean the other marketers out there that are competing for the same users. And if the metrics really outperform them, then you really are able to acquire those users prior to others and learn faster. How do they perform? Is it good for your strategy, for your KPIs? you're going to be able to bid faster and maximize that yield, and obviously scale faster once you have all those bids stabilized based on performance. And another unique thing here with Playable ads is that in some cases, if the ad is really similar to the game itself, you can leverage that and gain insights into the game design itself. We've seen a few examples where game features have been optimized based on how users engaged with the ad itself, with the Playable, color schemes, several complexity issues, and basically the interface itself is something that you can gain from users that might not even install your app, but you can still understand how they behave with the game itself.
Awesome. Thanks, guys, for walking us through the launch phase. And now let's dive into the last phase, the post-launch. Warren, back to you.
Sure thing. So if you are really lucky, your game graduated from launch to worldwide, and if you are even luckier, you've got a hit on your hands that can sustain, keep bringing profit into the company by long-running UA campaigns behind it. So we've been very fortunate. We've got one of our titles, Dominations, we've now been investing in profitably for over 2 years from the UA team, and we actually had our top 2 revenue months to date for the game, the last 2 months running. It's something that we're very proud of. We definitely failed plenty along the way getting here, but we've really developed our system to where when we find those hit games, we can build these long-burning campaigns to keep driving profit from them. So the goal of the UA team in this post-launch phase is you want to be maximizing your portfolio yield. So this means you're picking your best opportunities from all the titles that you might have available to you. At Nexon, we're very fortunate that we have a large number of titles between both what we develop and what our South Korean parent company sends our way. So we can kind of place our bets here and not chase bad money. When you're in this post-launch phase, you're going to see that your CPIs get highly variable if you're doing it right, and we'll touch a little bit more on why these start being all over the place. But kind of start ignoring the CPI and focus on the ROI of your efforts, and we'll talk a little bit about how you track that. As far as the creative strategy for a game that graduates to post-launch support, you want to start building a monthly cadence with your creative team. So I suggest like a monthly sync for reviewing current ad performance, and refreshing the ideas. So you want to share the stats, talk about what's working, what's not. I encourage both the UA team and the creative team to bring content to the meeting, share what they've seen in the industry or even outside of the industry, trends that they're excited about, new ideas. And this will be like your monthly creative strategy session for the title. When you're developing these ongoing UA creatives, I suggest looking at a 50-50 split, with half of the ideas just being iterative. Hey, we saw this concept work, let's try more of it, or let's try different sizes of it. And 50% being experimental creative, being wild concepts that are more likely to have a fail rate, but more likely to also be that high risk, high reward. Also, you got to stay on top of the emerging ad formats. We definitely touched on playables and how that's making a big difference right now. Next year, I'm sure we would be talking about something totally different and new. So never get lazy, and just because a monthly cadence for a game might be videos every month, when that new format emerges, you need to make sure that you have that touch point to start integrating it to your creative refreshes. And the last thought is just make friends with your creative team. They're amazing allies when you're working together, if they're working towards the same goals as you and you can start speaking the same language. For me, I always say it's like the laziest way to improve campaign performance is just make a badass creative, and if you double your install rate on it, all of a sudden our jobs get twice as easy. So definitely nurture that relationship with them. Moving to the next slide. So talking about some additional best practices for that post-launch phase. You want to be assessing and updating that LTV curve every month. The free-to-play game, like what we make, is game as a service. It's always evolving. The economy is changing. There's game updates. So always keep assessing that and make sure the curve that you drew out a month ago is still relevant, or if you need to tweak it. You also want to start testing globally. Take your game to as many markets as you can with small controlled spend, And if you see that it takes off in an unexpected market, we found some for dominations that we never expected that we would see such scale and ROI in. So we localized for those markets. We worked with the developer, Big Huge Games, developer of dominations, and they brought in some new localizations for us so we could more aggressively go after those markets where we saw initial traction. You also want to make sure when you're making your bidding models that you have a clean way to factor in organic lift. And what I mean by this is not all organics, but the organic lift that's specifically caused from your UA efforts. So you need to work with your product team and your analysts, if you have them, to try to map out trends in, what's your baseline for organics, and when you have bursts of UA activity, how is that affecting? So for every paid user you bring in, we usually attribute some portion of an organic user that we see corresponds with them. Another good practice is you want to be looking back regularly. We talked about setting up these targets. You need to still look back historically and say, hey, when I had that D7 goal of 20%, did it actually turn into 100% eventually? And make sure that you're always looking back. And one reason that Dominations is working so smoothly now is, we have years of fine-tuning it and improving what those goals are that we need to hit. And now we have a lot of confidence in what we need to do in the first few days to know that half a year in, we're likely to make our money back on that player. Another thing to consider post-launch is whether it's proper to start spinning out retention and remarketing or re-engagement campaigns for the game. Any game that has several 100,000 users, you want to at least be considering this. And a great time to kick this off is if you know you have a big content update coming. That's one of the best ways to bring in like a lapsed player or lapsed whale, is if they got maybe they exhausted all the early content, you've got something new and exciting to show them. And then the last thought, as far as post-launch support, is you got to know when to stop. So mobile games don't live forever. The market's always changing and what people want. If you find a really strong game, it can sustain you for years, but it's definitely the exception rather than the rule. And be really honest about when performance is dropping. Sometimes that's the fault of the UA team's efforts, and you have to tighten up your ship. But other times it just means the game's getting a little long in the tooth and it's not what the market wants anymore. So knowing when to move on is key. That's it for me.
Thanks, Warren. At this stage, obviously, like Warren mentioned, this is about really maximizing the yield and scaling up globally. And in order to achieve that, the best practice obviously is around maximizing each pocket, each dimension of supply you're getting based on the performance. And you want to be able to dynamically bid on those KPIs, on those dimensions, based on the KPIs. And in terms of capacity, if you don't have the ability to really iterate that on the daily or every couple of days, you want to be able to work with a partner that does that for you. Based on their technology and their analytics teams and the operations teams, this is the best way to achieve that. So you're working with the right sources. When it comes to understanding the upside and really capturing each opportunity, you want to be able to look at smaller pockets where there is early indicators of good monetization, even though you might not have the right sample size to make an early decision. You want to be able to really understand where can you scale up, and this is based on communication with the networks and really understanding where can you acquire more users if you increase the bid a bit. And obviously on the flip side is where do you need to drop the bid if you're not performing as well or if there's no need to bid as high. Outside of those pockets where you have the right sample sizes to make the right decisions, you want to be able to set the right bid for the rest of the network, the run-up network exploration, other smaller countries, smaller publishers. You want to be able to set the right baseline bid, and that's the bid that is going to secure some scale from those channels to the level that you feel confident with the KPIs. You do want to set the baseline bid in a way that it will allow room for growth from some publishers that you might haven't seen yet, that will go live soon, or pockets that are smaller, or countries that you're not sure about. So you really set the right bid to find those opportunities. And once you have the right data, in terms of sample size, you can move it to the bucket of dynamic bidding. When it comes to the creative optimization, obviously it's an ongoing process. You're launching in new countries, new markets. You want to start considering localization of the creatives, if there's text or voiceover. and you want to start innovating and discussing what type of creatives you wanna launch based on the network's best practices. You do want to refresh those creatives every now and then to reach the right users that might have seen the old ads and decided not to download the game. And obviously, when it comes to new game features that are unique or really new to the game and that affect the gameplay, you want to promote those features using the right creatives. And you want to promote those features to users that already have the game. So you should consider re-engagement, which is something that you can do using Adjust and ironSource, and really address those features with old users and get them back into the game and increase monetization from those ones. With time, like Warren mentioned, you want to adjust the campaign performance objectives. Early on, you're not sure, you're not confident about how those LTV curves will look like. You're not sure about how much risk you can take with the game, but as time goes by, you're able to really see how that curve behaves, and you want to iterate on those performance objectives. If you haven't changed those objectives after a couple of weeks, you're probably missing out on an opportunity here. And from the network perspective, the network needs to see what's really happening compared to the curves, and if there's an opportunity of growth there. And one key thing that is happening as the game is already live is there's constant improvements to monetization. So with time, monetization becomes stronger and stronger, and you want to align the goals, the new curves with the goals you're communicating to the network. In this slide, this is data you can see in one of the case studies on our website. Basically, you can see the whole process from soft launch to real global launch, where campaigns, you can see the purple line shows the KPI fulfillment in terms of the performance versus goal, and the blue line shows the scale in terms of the users acquired, and you can see that how each step in the process affects the KPI fulfillment and also the scale that you're trying to achieve to really maximize the yield. You can see what happens at the beginning is that you're working a lot on creative optimization. You're not sure which creative will perform better. Once you figure that out, you start scaling volume. You start understanding better what hits the KPIs as well. You might be overachieving KPIs like we had in this case, which means if you're overachieving, it means you're probably leaving some room for scale. And this is exactly what happens here. The baseline bids were increased to take more risk, to tap into more supply sources, and to learn faster about their performance. You can see the KPI fulfillment goes down, and then with time, when you start dynamically bidding per dimension, first in the big countries, in this case it was US, and you can really reach those KPIs while scaling up the volume of the campaign, which is combined together will really maximize your yield. That's it for me.
So for all the daily responsibilities and the optimization and whatnot, Adjust will come in, and we're supposed to be helping you guys analyze that. So now that we have users, the game is more mature, it's launched, we'll be able to get some findings here. So when the data starts coming in, we're going to segment the users according to popular ad serving levels. This means network, campaign, ad group, and creative. So with that, you'll be able to make performance evaluations all the way down to the creative level. This is incredibly helpful as well for seeing comparative performance for KPIs such as clicks, impressions, installs, re-engagements, or as we say, reattributions, custom events, revenue, and more. And something that's really cool here is that, of course, sky's the limit. What a lot of people have done is do A/B tests, right? And the way that they paint the picture here is up to them, and the way that they traffic their sources, right? So this probably takes some balance between a partner like Yevgeny and then people like Warren running the UA. And of course, all of this data that we have here can be passed. Now, that's what we call a deliverable. It's more of a straightforward counter. Next will be our cohort analysis. Right, okay, yeah. So the cohort analysis, it's again, like before, that deliverables part is really straightforward. ironSource one and install plus one install, right? But cohorts here, it's good for our analysis. I mean, this is like a next level from that. We assess in-app performance by the creative. So cohorts, we group users according to a common denominator. And we follow this group of users and their behaviors over time, right? So Warren was saying that they wanted to look at retention on day 1, day 7, day 30. What are these guys doing, etc. So a popular example from what we can find from cohorts is from the last 30 days, let's see how many people actually registered within a week, right? Some clients will only pay out on CPA if people convert on registration within the week of install. We can show you that, right? Also as well, clients can evaluate channels based on the day that users will start purchasing, right? So channels that had users converting on the day of install up to 2 days after install can sometimes be more impactful to the client than a channel that only had users purchasing maybe a week later, right? Again, the findings and what you deduce from that is going to be up to you. We just want to give you the visibility at Just here. So another cool example is, especially in context for gaming clients, is that we are able to determine days of that signify engagement or levels that signify engagement. So, for example, one client, we were able to determine that users were kind of stopping at level 5, like a significant portion of users were stopping at level. What did that client do after that? They indicated that probably this is probably like the wall or like the point of engagement. Users making it past that were very engaged. Another finding was that perhaps they needed to make it easier or more enticing for users to go beyond level 5, right? As well, we're also able to see the lifetime values of users. And with cohorts, we're able to analyze users from the beginning of your time at Just, right? So if you have users who installed like 4 years ago, we'll still be able to track their performance in the app today, right? So after that, so that is like really a lot of our analysis. Of course, happy to take more questions on that. But besides the analysis of the users in your app, what are they doing? You know, where are the channels that are most impactful? Adjust is also trying to help mitigate the issue with fraud. Fraud is endemic in the industry, and it's real. But we wanted to give a bit more power to the UA guys and at least see what's going on. We have a few tools behind that. One is an anonymous IP filter. Clearly, that's like users coming in from a known exit node or Tor, or if it was like a blacklisted area, we will tell you as such. As well, we have distribution modeling, which we analyze the click to install behavior, and we try to find patterns of fraud within that, right? If we see that this install is fraudulent, don't worry, we're still going to track that user. We're just not going to give it to the person that fraudulently got that install. So again, all this leads towards protecting your UA budget and preserving the quality of your app. Now, Warren and the Nexon team they've been utilizing this fraud tool, and I believe that he wanted to give some something anecdotal for you guys. Warren?
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, I just want to say I don't normally do a lot of these types of webinars because a lot of times they can turn into product pitches, and we don't like to put our name on any product that we aren't actually big fans of. But Adjust has been a good partner, and the fraud suite is awesome. So we gave it a trial run before we signed up, and even though the percentage of traffic was relatively small that was actually fraud because we do a lot of manual checking for it. The scale that we buy, and just with multiple offices all running their games, the actual amount of fraud that it caught was still massive. There's a lot of fraud solutions out there, but the thing that we like about Adjust is you can be really lazy. Like you don't have to do anything other than turn it on. And if install is caught by any of their fraud flags, you simply don't pay for it. Most of the ad networks work off of billing from your attribution provider, and the ad network will not even be sent the install. So that player, if they are a real player, could ostensibly still install the game. It's not sending them to a dead page or anything, but you're not being billed for it because if it triggers those flags, the install is not sent to the network. So yeah, it definitely was one of the easier calls as far as products for us to add into our suite of tools.
Okay, so next, again, we really pride ourselves on the analysis and giving you the tools. In this regard, we do have this audience builder that we have. And what this does is that we create user lists or device lists or push token lists based on customized criteria. And so, for example, a popular one would be, okay, if Warren and the team were really looking for users who were to purchase or be engaged just within a week of install, there are also going to be users who aren't engaged from the week, in the week of install or beyond, right? So what we would be able to do, for example, is, okay, audience builder, give me a list of users who did install the app, let's say over a week ago, and yet still haven't made a purchase, or users who've installed over a week ago and yet still have not hit this level 5 engagement that I want them to hit. We will give you that list of device IDs, and then we'll be able to, and with that you'll be able to whitelist, so ironSource will be able to take a list of users, retarget them, maybe hit them with a special offer just because it's like, come back to the app and do this. Sky's the limit. And the great part about the audience builder is that we're also able to run A/B tests for your retargeting, right? We'll be able to take this batch of users and split them into lists. So let's say you wanted to spread that out across 5 different providers. We will create an API for those 5 different partners so they can refresh the list and target the users consistently. You'll be able to measure that performance against the 4 other partners you're running against with similar lists.
Thanks to you guys for these actionable insights. Thanks to all our attendees for bearing with us. We're definitely over time, so we'll just take 1 or 2 questions here and try to answer those. So there's a couple of questions that we got regarding limited resources in the launch phase. How would you, Warren, do you have any kind of insight on like how to achieve and optimize when you actually have limited resources?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have the luxury of having a great team that I work with at the Nexon UA team right now. But I've also been in situations where I was literally the only UA person for multiple games, and we just didn't have a creative team for marketing and UA. So we touched on a few of those things, but the one thing I would say is leverage your networks as much as you can. We already touched on that they can help you with the creative ask. You can also get really creative, no pun intended, with how you make those videos. I would reach out to like friends from college that I knew were involved in film and video, and also gamers, and have them make these like wacky live action UA videos that sometimes were a big hit. And we would do some really low budget stuff. We would actually sometimes even get creative and shoot things in the office with like cardboard cutouts and things like that. At the end of the day, you just need to get someone's attention, but still, prime them and make them interested in the game. So you can get around the creative resources piece. As far as the optimizations resource, again, that's a place where you can leverage your networks, but you really have to educate them to your unique goals. They're not going to be able to read your mind. And the kind of default goals that a network is going to optimize to are not going to be the same as yours. So you really need to get you on the same page as them. Those are the first things that come to mind. Yeah, and the last thing I would say is, don't bite off more than you can chew. Only try to operate networks that you can master. You can entertain agencies to touch on some of those networks that are important, but you don't have the internal expertise. But I would tread very lightly because an agency's primary KPI is going to be the amount of spend, and that's not how an internal team works. Like for us, we want to be spending the least we can to make the most amount of money. So be very careful and get a lot of word-of-mouth recommendations if you're going to go with an agency.
Awesome, thank you. We have a couple of questions around budgeting, and how to structure that. Could you guys maybe give some insight in regards to like what's the typical configuration of how you should structure your budget?
Yeah, I took the last one. I'm happy to add some color here, but if somebody else wants to touch on this.
Yeah, I can touch on that, Warren. I think budget should be obviously aligned with the resources a developer has, and it's something that is critical. I think is to understand how would your average CPIs would look like for testing purposes, and you want to have enough data so you can make the right decisions. So typically, what we're seeing is in the 10 to 20K range for initial tests, where you can really acquire a set of users and see how they perform and make the right decisions. It can be lower than that if your CPIs are low. It can be higher than that if you're in the $10 to $30 CPI range. But I think 10 to 20K would be the average budget for testing purposes.
Yeah, one thing I would add here is reach out to your networks, let them know the countries that you're going to be in for each phase, and get an average CPI for your game genre. So you can make a little spreadsheet that basically has, your 4 networks you're using and the countries for each phase and estimated CPI for each. And then you can just calculate out, if we expect a quarter of our installs from ironSource and a quarter from each of the other 4 networks. These are the CPIs. We need 5,000 users total for this phase. And that's usually the way that we'll mock up budget. If we already have a lot of data on the networks, we'll usually make our own estimations. But if it's a new network, we'll talk to our contacts and get average CPIs for those regions.
Thank you both. That's great insights. Last one here, we got a couple of questions in regards to fraud and what you can expect. There's a pretty specific question from Ruben. Maybe that one's for Matt. If an install has a time difference lower than 10 to 15 seconds, but it's clean on the anti-fraud systems, should it be considered fraud?
Yeah, absolutely. So just to clarify, you mean an install has a time difference lower than 10 to 15 seconds. You mean from the time of click to the install, it's about 10 to 15 seconds, right? Really, so what it just tries to do is that we try to find the common denominators that we can hold everyone to, right? Laws, rules are black and white, but there's a whole lot of gray, right? So when it comes to the gray parts, we don't want to overstep our bounds. We want to make sure that we're confident in what it is. 10 to 15 seconds, depending on the app and the game, yeah, that could be a little low, right? Especially when you're going through your testing and validation. I've sat there with QA teams and put a stopwatch on how long does it take for me to go from the click to the install to the open, right? That's something that we can provide you, the raw data, but that's not something that a just will say this is fraudulent yet. This is something that we have considered, something we considered, but we haven't put put the footprint on. This is the way it should be yet.
Awesome. Guys? Yeah, go ahead if you want to add something.
That being said, some people do use that in the raw data. See, this is why we pass you the data. Some clients will say this is not valid, and some people will. There are other configurations to the SDK that Adjust provides that will help you find the fraud in a different way. So for example, one of my other clients is an internal ID. We assign that when the game state loads, and then the Adjust SDK pairs that with the IDFA. If the client sees that the PGID is not valid or never was assigned, right, then we can assume that that install wasn't real. But that's not something that Adjust will say. This is something that the client tells the partner or tells their acquisition source that because there was no ID, we're not going to give that to you, right? So again, it's just all about configuration. If we get to that point, anyone at Adjust will be happy to go more into that technical detail.
Awesome. I'm going to have to cut you guys off there. I see a couple questions coming in. We'll definitely get to those right after the webinar, maybe following up via email. Guys, presenters, thank you very much for your actionable insights today, which hopefully our attendees will make good use of. Once again, Warren, Evgeny, Matthew, thanks for putting in the content there. I hope the takeaways will be great for our attendees. And thank you to all our attendees for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed this as much as we did, and we'll definitely see you for the next webinar. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate the opportunity. Well, talk soon. Cheers.
Cheers.